All right, well, Jerry, thank you so much for joining us on the Future of the Human Experience. I know it's been a work in progress, but you're visiting us in the Valley in the Sun. So again, thank you so much for making time for us to connect today.
No, thanks for the invitation, man. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time.
Yeah, so Jerry, to just introduce you to the rest of the world, right? You're not only a keynote speaker, you become a fellow friend of mine as well in the space, but also you're leading and you're CEO of a wonderful organization that's supporting speakers and elevating speakers all around the country. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, thanks, Eric. The job title that I'm most proud of is dad, right? And so being a dad and father of two really informs the work that I do, both in the short term and the long term. The short term, I think, as many parents, and including yourself, would understand, is we need to be able to provide for our family, right? And so having both transitioned away from the corporate world, the question has always been, can I provide for my family in the same way, but do it in a setting where I have a little bit more control over both my schedule and the time that I get to spend with my kids, and ultimately sort of impact that I want to have. And it's that second part that I think is most important, or even more important than the first, because how do we create a world that our kids can grow up into, our grandkids can thrive in? And so the reason I speak and the topics on which I speak on are primarily around the experiences of Asian American folks within the corporate environment, how we use our stories, and for many of us, we cannot tell our stories without the lens of culture and our personal experiences. And three, how do we marry those things to inspire other people to do the same? And so I speak for a living after having done a 15-year stint in the corporate world through sales and marketing, through consulting, having gone to graduate school. And now I speak for a living. I also coach and prepare other speakers to do the same, because it is also important that, just like you, I had to learn a lot of these things about the speaking world on my own. Being a keynote speaker is not in the immigrant parents' list of jobs that they want us to pursue, right? And so how we had to figure out what to speak about, how to get gigs, what to get paid, and all these things, there's not a playbook for that. And so I want to make that accessible, and not only accessible, but believable and achievable for people who look like me, people who like you. And really, it's not to say that our voices are better than anybody else's, but it is simply to reflect the changing nature of our communities, the audiences that fill these auditoriums and convention centers at these corporate events. We just want everybody in the room to feel seen and heard through our stories. And I believe that we need more voices like ours, because the world is continuing to change. And so I speak, I coach other people how to speak, and it's been so much fun. And the most important part of it is that unless I'm on the road for speaking opportunities, I get to do all the pickups, all the drop-offs, all the activities, and I really get to be the dad that I want to be.
I love that, Jerry. And this was, again, just to give the audience a behind the scenes, this is the conversation we probably had when we first met. Yeah. It was pretty much exactly this, which is you telling us a little about your why, and just that resonated with both of us. We just clicked, especially having two little ones as well. And also the pickup and the drop-off, again, as someone that didn't have a chance to do this early on in my career, early on in the life of our children, and now I had a chance to do that. Like, I just remember those small little times that I had a chance to do that. It was just a privilege. And it was like the sense of excitement that my kids had of like, my dad's picking me up today. My dad's dropping me up today. And now it's just more like we've normalized it, right? Sure. And so that absolutely resonates with me. And Jerry, also, I think will be really interesting to hear more about your story too, is how was it when you were navigating this, also leaving corporate America, coming into this space? Because you're right, sometimes in our own communities, I went through a lot of questions probably for the first 6 months and asking me like, Eric, are you still doing that thing, the speaking thing? Or are you going back to doing the normal thing that we all have done? How was that conversation for you with your immediate family, your extended family?
Before I got serious about speaking, my path to speaking was really through content online. And so I created a lot of content on LinkedIn, which then helped me find my voice, to gain the confidence and the following to really be invited to speak. And the reason I got serious about creating content on LinkedIn was that I got fired. And so almost to the day 5 years ago, I got fired. And so when you get fired, what you're supposed to feel is both shame and urgency, right? Because we are taught that our identities and our self-worth is really tied to our job title, the company that we represent. And mind you, to give folks perspective, this was 2 short years after I had graduated from my business school. And so while that may sound cool, that also means that there's a lot more urgency, because there's grad school debt, there's expectations, there's also social pressure. And so everybody was saying, what's next for you? What are you doing? And it's what's next is always or generally asked in the term of what job are you going to pursue? because it's always in this form of a corporate W-2 job environment that people feel that you should chase. And while some people think that going to grad school, particularly MBA program, gives you more opportunity, it sometimes limits it because people expect you to pursue certain career trajectories. And so in any case, and my wife will tell you the story is very different, but the way that I remember it is I said, hey, let me get 6 months to figure this stuff out because I feel very frustrated in the experiences that I've had up to this point. And what something that I hadn't tried was to really bet on myself and to see if I can make this work. Context is that at this point, my son was 2.5, my daughter was 6 months. And so any logical parent would tell you, not the time to take a risk, go get a job and figure it out. But I felt that there was something else that I could do to not only replace the income that I was making, but to do better and also be present at home. So with the opportunity that we had, with a little bit of runway, I gave myself 6 months. At the end of that 6 months was COVID. And so I was forced to prolong this experimentation period at a time where I needed to be home with the kids, at a time when companies stopped hiring, at a time that also fortuitously meant that because student loans paused and daycares closed, we extended our financial runway just a little bit. And so I started telling Asian American stories through my podcast, which at the time was also needed for the community, for healing and for processing and for community building. And that led my foray into speaking because corporate America at one point wanted to hear Asian American perspectives. And the thing about being a corporate America person is that when you're in the system, it's really hard to be honest about those experiences. And so me being an outside perspective, but also somebody with the academic and professional experience and resume, that was a match made. But it's also because I put in the work to put the content out there. And so when people were looking for a speaker that matched these descriptions, they thought of me.
I love that, Jared, because you're also an example of how technology gave you those tools to basically share your human experience, right? And that connected with other individuals as well. And on the journey you've been on over the last 5 years or so, you've built not only this following, this brand, but more importantly, you've built this voice that sounds not only very authentic, but you're inspiring other individuals like myself to bring those authentic voices also to life. Can you share with us a little bit more about the work that you're doing today in world-class speakers to help these speakers bring those stories to life? And why does it matter so much to you to help all of us bring our stories?
So in the traditional media world, so when you and I were growing up, there were people, systems, and industries who governed what we consumed as content. So if you wanted to be on TV, a TV station had to give you a show because it was a finite number of shows that were available. Same thing in the printed media world, whether it was a magazine or a book or a newspaper, an editor who probably didn't look like me and you had to say your story is worth telling. On radio, somebody had to give you a show. What traditional media worked around was a finite number of opportunities to broadcast a story and a permission-driven one. When you and I were growing up, that's why we didn't see as many books written by people like me and you, stories across any medium. The internet changed that forever. If you look at the early days of YouTube, you'll notice that many of its earliest stars were Asian American. Not because we were better at technology, it's simply because we weren't being allowed or being given permission to have a TV show. Yet we were talented and had this craft. And so guys like AJ Raphael or Wong Fu Productions, they went to YouTube and they became megastars on YouTube because the audience always wanted to hear from them. They were just never allowed to. And so the light bulb moment was realizing that we had good stories to tell, and now we no longer had any excuse not to tell them because the technology allowed us to. You don't need permission from anybody to start a podcast. You don't need anybody's permission to start an Instagram account, start posting on LinkedIn. The only permission you need is to give to yourself that your story matters and to really believe that other people will also resonate with it. And that's the part that I really want to focus on, is that we have been conditioned in such a permission-driven society, both from the worlds that we exist in academia and the professional space, but also in our own minds. And that's probably the tougher thing to crack, is that we have been conditioned by ourselves, our peers, our families, our cultures to say, you have to do what you are allowed to do. May I do this? You need to apply to something. To believe that you can without anybody else telling you is a tremendous amount of courage that it takes to say, I can. And sometimes somebody else needs to hold your hand and not only tell you that you can, but also teach you how. And that's what I want to do. It's not simply enough for me And it's not because I've climbed this Mount Everest of speaking and I'm done. I'm certainly not. But in the process, I need to bring other people along. And I need other people to get loud together, because it's also a little bit better when there's people with you, right? And it's not just about people who look like me. There's so much resonance between your culture and mine. There are so many, the changes in the demographics of our communities is more mixed race, more mixed identities. And so we're all gonna be one together. And I think just saying, hey, that's your crew, that's my crew, and playing identity games, it doesn't help anybody, right? And I think once we realize that there's so much through line in the stories of our not only immigrant but American experiences is what makes your story and mine truly, really valuable in a way that we've never really been told that it has been.
Absolutely. And Jerry, and even though right now you're working with probably individuals that are doing work outside of the corporate realm, that doesn't necessarily mean, even if you're in the corporate space today, you sharing your story is probably just as valuable, if not even more valuable today, right? So even the work that you get to do today is even inspiring those individuals to tell their stories in their own spaces within their own environments as well. I remember one of my aha moments in my career in corporate America was that people were reaching out to me because of who I was, not necessarily because where I worked. And it was the first moment that I gave myself that permission to use those terms, right? Of separating that and being okay with that and being like, oh, wow, they're not calling me because I'm Eric Rodriguez, this title X. They're calling me because of the perspectives I'm willing to share. And I think what you're sharing with us today is that we all have that ability to do that today, regardless of where we're at in our careers and our stages and what have you. We have the ability to tell our stories, but more importantly, you have a call to action for all of us to do that, because we're going to create a better, more inclusive world because of it. And so, Jerry, with that said, one of the things too I also love about your work is when we get into the speaking room, some of the guidance that sometimes we're given when we're entering these spaces is, hey, just stay out of politics. Don't get involved in politics. Yeah. One of the things that you've done is if you actually leaned into this because of not only your background, but also because of who you are, again, leaning into the authenticity, right? Yeah. You have a wonderful experience in engaging with politicians at the country level. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and kind of how have you leaned into that in this times of sometimes people asking us, maybe don't say too much about that?
Sure, I think it's a number of different things. And one, while I believe in the true principles of authenticity, I think there's nobody that really truly speaks their mind, especially in the corporate and the corporate adjacent spaces. And then two, I can't tell my story without who I am. And so what some may consider or label politics, to me, is simply my experience, right? And so it's not, I don't label things in the inclusion and equity space politics because it's for me to have opportunity. It's for my daughter to have access to things. It's for my friends to have decency and dignity. And so when we think about things that impact people's life and really the things that we stand for, to me, those are not politics. Those are not political issues. Those are, those are issues or those are topics of humanity. And so when I leave with humanity, it's saying, hey, I think that people should have the right to bodily autonomy. That's not a political issue for me. That is a fundamental right of humanity. And so if you disagree with me, that's fine. But I'm also not going to not say those things, right? And so, and I think there are, to be frank, there are things that people have to decide for themselves on what types of clients and what types of work they want to do, right? And so there are people who say more divisive things or more opinionated things than I do, right? And so people are not confused about where my viewpoints are because I share them, but I don't overly share them. Right? And so it's understanding where the lines are. It's understanding what you're willing to do and not willing to do. And it also really informs what types of audiences you want to work with. If you want to work with Fortune 100 corporate American entities, you don't say there are things that you probably shouldn't do because it's not about you, it's about them. Yeah. It's about them wanting to protect their brand, and it's about them wanting to protect their culture, which is totally fine. And there are people who make great money, probably even more money than you and I, but they're so more opinionated because there's an audience for that. And so it's realizing that there's an audience for every opinion and that you have an opinion because there's not a single person that has an opinion of their own. There's communities and there are people that will resonate with what you're saying. And for me, it's been okay. And look, I think it's, an interesting part of my speaking journey is when I had the podcast, The Asian Americans, I was blessed to have our Vice President Kamala Harris on the show. For me, it was important and so humbling and just all the words to have the first Asian American Vice President on my show, sharing with me and my audience about her Asian American experience. I could ask her questions that other hosts can't. And she felt a level of comfort and resonance with me that she doesn't with other hosts. There was a sponsor who did not want to sponsor that show because they said, we don't touch anything remotely political. And I asked a follow-up question. I said, she is factually the current sitting vice president of Asian descent. I am a neutral Asian American conversation show. And she goes, we do not want to touch that. And so, again, and companies have every right, just like humans do, to make those decisions. And so, for me, it's also a line that I'm not willing to cross, right? And so it's important to make money. It's important to build businesses. And for the ways that I have lived my values in my business, in both speaking and in the coaching practice, people have come to me. And so it's not, and there are people who don't want to do business with me, which is fine. But I would rather stand for something and to have people who believe in what I stand for want to work with me than to stand for nothing and to not have people know what you stand for.
So Jerry, going back to how you built your personal brand, we have, as the world is moving at the rate that it's moving so fast, you're seeing all these constant changes that are happening. But the constant I've been seeing over the last several years is the capabilities and the abilities for us to build our personal brands today are probably, the barriers to doing that are probably lowering exponentially as we see. Yeah. Any tips that you have today for audiences that have been nibbling a little bit and want to try it out? What are some encouragement that you would give them today for them to start building their own personal brands?
Your story is being told. You have to ask yourself, who's telling that story? Your story will be told whether you like it or not. Your story will be told whether you tell it or not. So we think about how our story has been told through childhood. It is first told our doctors. It is then told through our parents, then our teachers, which then evolve into our coaches and the people, our counselors. Our stories are actually told then by these people called admissions counselors, who dictate what schools we can attend, then by professors who give us grades, then by recruiters who give us job offers, then by managers and hiring committees. And there's groups of people who don't know you, who may not care for you and your values, who will always tell your story. At what point are you going to take ownership of your story and saying it's time for me to dictate what people know me for and what people want to compensate me for? And so everybody's story is told. Who will tell yours? If you let other people tell it, they will tell it in the version that behooves them. Because everybody, no matter even your own parents, your own siblings, everybody else has a perspective and a lens through which they will tell your story. And so I look at personal brand through sort of this 5 levels, right? So one, we've always been told that it's what we know. And we've all learned that simply that's not enough. And then so the epiphany thing people would say is it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And like, okay, cool, I know a bunch of people. But is that enough? It's not enough. So then you flip that and you say it's not what you know, it's not who you know, it's then who knows you, right? So it's you're building your reputation and your brand. And you're saying, okay, that's cool, but what do they know you for? And so you have to have some context and some content to which what you're known for. And ultimately, if you want to build a personal brand that is profitable and powerful, you have to answer this 5th question. Based on not what you know, not who knows you, but not in addition to what they know you for, what are they willing to pay you for? And this last bit is the most important that people don't get. And so as speakers and as entrepreneurs, we want to get paid for the delivery of the services and the impact that we can deliver to organizations and to people. If you're in the corporate space, is what skills and what benefit are they willing to exchange you for your salary, for your promotion, for your bonuses, for equity, whatever it is. It's that compensation piece that is objective, that determines your value, and it is predicated or is determined or informed by your personal brand. Your story will be told. If you never fight for a promotion, they may never promote you. If you don't ask for more money, they may never give you more money. You have to ask for it. And in the sense of using technology, it is so easy, right? It is opening up your camera. It is opening up your camera, recording yourself, sharing your words. It's opening up LinkedIn, Instagram, anything, your own domain, writing words. It has never been easier. And of course, there are tools now in the evolving and quickly evolving world of AI that help you. But what AI will never be able to replace is the humanity. You can mimic humanity, but you cannot replace humanity, and you can never replace me. AI will never replace me and you on a stage. They can't replace my memory. They cannot replace my jokes. They cannot replace the feelings that I create with other people in the audience. So while some people are saying, hey, AI is going to replace us all, you can't. You can't replace me, right? So you can't replace humanity. And so, personal brand is this big word that causes some anxiety in people. Be like, oh, it sounds this big thing. It's simple. It's really, how are you going to tell your story in the mediums or in the media that allows you to connect with the people that determine your worth, and whether you dictate that worth for yourself by becoming your own boss or a founder or an entrepreneur, or how you dictate and maximize your value through compensation through salaries and other methods. But you have to dictate what your worth is through personal branding.
And Jared, one of the things too I appreciate about your work is that you also say, hey, there are all these tools available. There's this ability for us to engage this, but it also takes time. Like deep work takes time, right? Finding out what you want to say, how you want to say it, what you want to be known for, takes time. And even though AI could be moving at the speed that's moving, all these tools could be at your disposal tomorrow or in your pocket, your humanity and understanding yourself takes time. And that's something I appreciated from you, giving me that feedback when we first met, was when you're like, hey, what do you talk about? And I was like, I talk about this. Like, no, what's deeper than that? And I was like, what? And you just kept pushing me and encouraging me. And so I appreciate that, not only from you and from some other speakers as well. They gave me that guidance early on, saying, no, like really dig deep on why it matters to you to tell this story. And I think this podcast is also, I think, a symbol of that too, of creating these platforms for our audiences to learn about what their whys are, right? And for other individuals. With that said too, Jerry, one of the things too I like to do before we wrap up is, again, we've been able to get to know each other over the last few years, but do you have any questions for me that either about the work that I get to do or anything? What do you want to ask me as we're wrapping up today?
What's been the most meaningful speaker memory for you?
The most meaningful speaker memory was, I did this talk about the power of embracing disruption. And part of that keynote was I was talking about my grandmother. And I linked up my grandmother's story a little bit more about some of the lessons I learned from her and how I apply it to today to embracing disruption in this world of AI. And after the talk, a Latina lady came up to me and she said, you're the first speaker that I hear talk about an abuelita when you're talking about AI. And she's like, thank you for that. Thank you for telling your story. Thank you for bringing our culture into this conversation. That was, I think, a big aha moment for me and kind of just resonated. Okay, I'm onto something here. I'm just not only sharing the importance of the story, but the importance of sharing my story and why this resonates with me.
That's beautiful. I fundamentally believe in context being more important than content. I think in our world of thought leadership and speaking, people get obsessed over what do you talk about? It's more, how do you tell that story? Because I can take your script and I can't read it with the same energy and the same emotions you can. Same thing, right? And so you and I could read a best-selling book that sold millions of copies. It just won't hit the same, right? Because it is through our experiences and the emotions and the perspectives that we share with us. That's beautiful, man. And I will tell you, those have been, to me as well, some of the most meaningful things when people who look like me, people who know at least better than others what I've been through, come up to me and saying, you're the first person that looked like me. You're the first person that has talked about being you and the stories through which that you've told at my company, and I've been here 20 years. I've had those moments. And then so while that makes me happy, it also makes me a little sad. But it also makes me extremely optimistic because, hey man, if that's the bar, then we can shoot for the moon. Absolutely. And then really change lives. And my one tenet that I live by is the power of stories really is to make one person or anybody in the world feel a little less alone, right? It has the power and the opportunity to connect people in ways that math can't, that science can't. And it's through those emotional things of resonance and saying, man, I know what she's talking about, or I can see myself in their story. And so I love what you've done with this show, man. You built a platform to uplift others. And so it's been, I think it's been, we've known each other about a year, and I can't wait to see where you go with this and your speaking career and all the wonderful things that you do for your kids out here. But thanks, man.
Thank you so much, Terry, for being on the podcast. Thank you.
Ow!